Hello. So as my colleague Ron Brownstein just mentioned, we have heard a lot about criminal justice today from some of the more institutional players, public officials, public officers, and we're here to welcome 4 community leaders who are thinking about how criminal justice in Tucson relates to other questions about access and opportunity. I just want to start off by asking everybody to describe the neighborhoods and communities that you're working in Tucson. What are the issues that people care the most about? Can start off down the line.
One of the great things is that is a serious concern in our community is we know for a fact it's not a myth, it's not a theory. We have done a horrible job on incarcerating people in this nation. We have too many people that are incarcerated, and specifically dealing with the people of color, blacks and Latinos, represent a huge population in our country in regards to being incarceration, not just nationally, but we also have a local concern in our county jails. A lot of our county jails are also creating poverty. We are towing people's cars, which is a vehicle to keep a job. You lose your job, you lose your home, you lose your home, you lose custody of your children, all because of incarceration. So we need to get much better on being comprehensive, innovative, in how we look at incarceration. We call our institution the Department of Corrections, but our prison is not correcting anything. It's more a department of punishment. So we have to do much better on how we look at incarceration.
Grace, Lola, I see you shaking your head.
Yes, I was going to say that, and I'm actually agreeing with what Pastor Holt said. And the thing is that we need, as a community, to look at who we're criminalizing, and we have been criminalizing poverty for a long time. A lot of the offenses that people end up in jail on are drug-related. So we do have a problem with drugs here, but incarcerating people is not the solution. We also have a problem with profiling people of color. I live in what's called Browntown, south of 22nd Street, and we know that that's an area that police typically go to make arrests. So we have a disproportionate number of people of color who end up in the system. And so there is a problem with not only criminalization of people of color, but also criminalization of poverty. And understand, we have a lot of poverty in this community.
Yeah.
I work specifically with people who are incarcerated, formerly incarcerated, and their families. My work really is around positioning directly impacted people to lead these conversations, not as add-ons, but as the primary drivers. So many of the folks that I work with, we all position things like employment, education, housing as the most important things when we're talking about reentry, and they are important. But I think that for everyone, and particularly people who have been directly impacted, what we're looking for is community. And that's something that's deeper, and that gets at the kind of heart center of who we are as human beings.
Jacob?
Yeah, I agree with what Grace is saying here. I think a lot of the things that I see that we're dealing with in the work we do in our communities, which is like primarily south of 22nd, Mexican, people of color communities, is just like a lack of those, not only those basic resources like housing and jobs and all that, but like even just alternate pathways, like the people that I've seen that I work with, when we introduce some of the things that we're trying to do, it's like the first time they've ever even heard like an alternate way of living or alternate way of community. So it's just like a lack of access to that and a lack of even knowledge of something different,
Absolutely. When we have a lot of conversations about criminal justice, something that comes up often is referencing public safety. And I'm interested in how you all kind of in your different modes of working with the community define public safety. Lola, I want to start with you. You were a prosecutor and now you're working on advocating for bail reform.
Right.
Those seem like really kind of different parts of the criminal justice system. How has your personal journey changed how you define?
I think one of the things that's really important to know is that people of color who are particularly through our system are primed to become, agents of white supremacy in this country. So a lot of us come in believing that we're doing good things for our community. But in fact, what we're doing is perpetuating the same policies and practices that have made it difficult for us as people to thrive and prosper. So, you know, what you don't know, but once you do know, you need to do something about it, make a difference to change. And it's been a process of understanding just how much of a tool the criminal justice system has been and the oppression of people of color that's forced me to rethink my role as an attorney and as an advocate. And I think that one of the things that I would urge people to do, particularly people of color, communities of color, is to back away from the narrative of fear that the law and order advocates have been peddling for far too long. That they have us afraid of each other, afraid to be empowered to change, you know, and the solutions are not going to come from the people who were on this panel earlier, okay, because they are invested in maintaining that system. The people who are going to change it are the people most impacted by that. And we have the ability, we have the imagination, we have the solutions. And you know, calling 911 for people of color in this community is problematic. We have cops, only 40% of the cops who work in TPD live in the city. They don't live in the communities they police. Okay, that's number one. And so we have outsiders coming into communities that they do not see as communities that they want to protect, but they're there to come in with their guns drawn and with attitudes and with all these implicit bias against us in ways that create more problems than they solve. So we have to come up with solutions that allow us to figure out how to diffuse and de-escalate some of the I was going to say the tensions that breed the conflicts and violence that we deal with in our communities. And I think that's what I'm hoping is that we're going to have some amazing people with solutions. I think some of the young women in particular, I have been so impressed by the type of energy and fierceness I see coming from some of the young activists in our community here. So I'm hoping that they're going to be part of that solution.
You talked about people, you know, building off of that, talked about people being part of the solution. Grace, you're actually helping to conduct a survey about what public safety means to the people of South Tucson. What are they saying? What are you learning from the people that Lola has such great hopes for?
Yeah, so that's work. It's a collaborative research project with American Friends Service Committee and Flowers and Bullets. And really, you know, when we say things like community safety, public safety, or buzzwords like secure communities, it tends to conjure a certain set of meanings, right, that are typically associated with carceral safety, rooted in logics of banishment, right? But when you talk to community members about what makes them feel safe, what makes them feel protected, they say things like, my husband makes me feel safe and protected. Knowing my neighbor makes me feel safe and protected. One survey respondent said that Flowers and Bullets makes them feel safe and protected. And I think that's huge. It speaks to the work that young community organizers are doing in hyper-surveilled communities.
I want to talk some more about Flowers and Bullets. Jacob, public safety, we've talked, has a bunch of different meanings to a bunch of different people. And your organization does a lot of that community building, community growing. How do you think about public safety in developing those relationships?
For us, I mean, public safety definitely doesn't mean more cops and more policing our neighborhoods. My experience growing up in that community, even though it's been necessary and it's kind of like only solution sometimes in that sense, but policing and incarcerating has always led to like more and more problems, more and more issues. My family like affected by those things for years on end, you know, and whether if it's probation, continuing getting incarcerated. So I think for us, public safety is much different. Kind of alluding back to the survey Grace mentioned. It's that community, it's that, you know, being connected to each other. You know, the solutions are always within like our communities and our neighborhoods. It's never like very effective when outside sources and outside forces in that way come in. So, you know, some of the work we're doing, I'm hoping is effective in that sense, you know, in building that community. Yeah,
I was going to say the Second Chance Bail Fund, which grew out of a movement by Black Lives Matter nationally to bring attention to some of the terrible things coming about because of the cash bonds, which was basically a way of holding poor people in jail because they couldn't post bond. And I don't think that people and across the country really understood how we were using poor people and continue to use poor people to fund the criminal justice system, the prison industrial complex. It is built on the backs of poor people. In Tucson City Court, for example, we have a lot of people who are getting who are being detained because they're having their licenses suspended for not paying fines. Well, they can't pay fines because they're poor. They don't have the money. Okay, so they get arrested. They go to jail, and so we have this revolving door of poor people coming in and out of Tucson City Court. Now, the MacArthur, it was not MacArthur. It was the Goldwater and ACLU. Both organizations came out with a very scathing critique of the municipal courts in Arizona because they said they are not there about justice. They are there to make revenues for the cities. So we are using poor people and running them through a criminal justice system. We have a full-time prosecutors, full-time public defender's office. All of that's being paid for by fines mostly and who are paying those fines? Poor people. Right. And so if we want to change things, we need to look at how we've allowed our local criminal justice system to get way out of hand. And it's, we're the ones in charge of that. We elect the city council. We elect the folks who are supposed to be looking after our interests. And if we're going to put more money into courts than we do into kids, which we just did, shame on us, okay? Shame on us.
Absolutely. I want to switch gears a little bit. Obviously, we are in Arizona, and so we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the border and immigration and how it influences this community. Grace, how does local law enforcement agencies have said that they're not interested in carrying out ICE raids and things of that nature? How do you see that actually playing out in the community that you work with?
Well, I think that some of the earlier panels have kind of addressed this in terms of escalating fear, especially in our current political moment. I think that for marginalized communities, again, the state apparatuses aren't necessarily where people seek safety anyway. There are really wonderful collectives in town that people turn to instead of the police. And that's historic, right? It's always been that way. So we have Derechos Humanos, we have Mariposas Sin Fronteras, and a whole host of other organizations that provide advocacy for folks who are undocumented.
Jacob, how do you see that playing out in the work that you do in your local communities?
Well, there's definitely a sense of like trust issues in that power dynamic with people that don't have papers and trusting authorities like not even just law enforcement, but just agencies in general. And so, I mean, that's always like a hurdle that people have to deal with here, you know, and yeah.
Well, I want to step back a little and talk about trust and in the wider sense. Obviously, trust between law enforcement and community of color and low-income communities, there's always room for improvement in those areas. That's not a shock to anyone. How do you kind of think about that in the work that you do? Pastor Holt, I want to specifically talk about the work that you did starting some programs that aim to foster a relationship between the police and youth of color. How difficult has that been for you?
Well, there's some difficulties, and then I think there's an opportunity where people are waiting for some type of hope where we can bridge the gap and build a relationship. We understand that our officers are to be public servants for our communities, not to just be enforcers that come into what we call the hood and look at people of color as always a threat. And so one of the things I wanted to do is build a initiative, which I did with the Boys and Girls Club and TPD, which Hoops with a Cop program is something that me and the former chief had worked on. And it was to allow officers to come in on certain days of the week, work with kids of color or kids in urban areas so the kids can see that not all cops are bad. Now, I do have law enforcement in my family that puts their life on the line every time they go out to serve their communities. And I wanted them to see that that not all officers are bad. We do have some bad apples, and we do have to address that. But also, not only that, but they can also inspire to become police officers. Because another thing we need is we need more minorities on the police force. Kids need to see officers that look like them, and also give them hope that they can come into the criminal justice system and change the system from the inside. Secondly, the other thing was to allow cops to see black kids and not see them as hoodlums or just something to get in criminal activity, but there are some good, inspiring, intelligent kids of color that's going to be the next leaders today and tomorrow. And so that bridge was to help them to be able to see that we can, in some type of way, come together. Make no mistake, we still have bad apples. When you get pulled over in a traffic stop and you've been mistreated, I'm going to tell you right now, that's not the time to challenge the police officer. You don't have the power at that time. Don't act stupid. Turn on the light if it's dark. Roll out the window. Put both of your hands on the steering wheel so they can see where your hands are, so they don't use that as an excuse to pull out their firearm. Afterwards, get that badge number and then go down and make the report. But don't act unseemly or out of order at the time, because we don't want any more blacks to be shot down unarmed.
Lola, you don't seem to...
No, not at all, not at all. I'm with, first of all, I'm not with Second Chance Belfast, I'm also with Black Lives Matter Tucson, and that type of thinking, that second-class citizen type of thinking, feeds into this narrative that cops don't have to be responsible. You know, if cops don't know that they have intelligent black people, they shouldn't be cops. Okay? We don't need to meet with cops to let them know that we got intelligent black people. If you still don't know that, don't become a cop. And the thing is, I'm a citizen. This is your job. You chose to do that job. You are supposed to have gone through training. When you approach me, you're supposed to know how to approach me in a way that protects you, but also protects me. Why do I have to do all this extra stuff to make sure that you're scared behind doesn't pull a gun? If you're that afraid of people, don't become a cop. Okay? Hold a cops accountable. Okay? Well, we do know that one of the leading causes of death of cops is suicide. Okay? We know that's a hard job. But if that's the case, then cops need to be working on what are they doing to identify people who are not emotionally capable of doing that job. What kind of other issues are they not addressing? And see, I don't think that you can really, reform a cop culture that's built on white supremacy. They're doing exactly what they were trained to do. Okay? They are trained to come into certain communities and behave certain ways. Now, honestly, if I was non-black, I'd say the system works perfectly, because I'm not afraid of cops. But I'm not. I'm a mother of black children. I have a grandson, and I am terrified. He's getting ready to learn how to drive and get his license, and I am just terrified he's going to be pulled over by one of the TPD cops out here who's got a lot of rage and anti-blackness. I saw how they treated the protesters in February of this year who were, doing what they were supposed to do. They were doing an anti-deportation march, and we had some really vicious cops show up, pepper spraying people and acting in all kinds of thuggish, violent ways. If it hadn't been for the fact that they actually pushed down an 80-year-old white woman and some other folks and got that on video and it went viral, I think TPD would still be denying they did anything wrong. Okay? So we have a lot of police in this community who are not fit to be police. And I don't think having coffee and playing hoops with them is going to change that.
Well, let me say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, you can respond.
First of all, I don't think anyone on the platform is here to attack anybody. The point that I'm making is that, yes, we do have bad apples. I believe bad apples need to be flat out fired. But the point that I'm making is that's short term. Being pissed off after 2 weeks is going to go back to being systemic. Doing a couple marches a couple weeks, after a couple weeks, guess what the system knows? After everything calms down, the whole system goes back to doing the same thing we were saying. So just to be angry, and I'm getting there, I'm getting there. The point that I'm making is we have to inspire kids of color as well to become leaders in our community. Now, you can say what you want, but at the end of the day, we don't have any blacks on any branch of government. We don't have any blacks on city council. Who's advocating for black folks on city council? Nobody. Who's on the county board of supervisors? Tell me one black person that is on the county board of supervisors, and I tell you, there's nobody. Where's the full-time black judge on justice court? We don't have any. The point that I'm making, where are blacks on the governing board school districts? We don't have any. The point that I'm making is you can get emotional, get ticked off, have a couple marches, but the system is going to still go back down to what it is. What we need to do is reverse the school-to-prison pipeline, start kicking all these black kids out of school, and put them in juvenile detention centers, and then they can't get an education. We need more African-American and minority kids to finish high school, go to college, go to law school, get in the criminal justice system, become a black prosecutor. What we have is when we look at nationwide, we got a lot of officers that have shot down African-American unarmed men, and by the time it goes to the grand jury, it's dismissed before we can do anything. If we have more African-Americans that will become prosecutors as such as what you were, or become into the judicial system, more judges, we start seeing reform. I'm sorry, we can't keep playing a game of checkers when the system is playing a game of chess for a mighty long time. We got to move on and start making
But you were part of that. You were on one of those discipline committees, right? I saw you at that meeting. Yeah. And I'm telling you, how many cops got disciplined out of that situation where they were viciously attacking the protesters, okay? You know, like I do, Pastor Holt, that you are window dressing for a system that does not hold these cops accountable. They do not hold cops accountable. And they use people like you and other people in this community to make it look like they give a doggone. They are not holding these people accountable, because we see them.
Holt, I think you both have addressed kind of forward-looking motions of what we hope for in the community. And we've talked a lot about the past and a lot about short-term reforms. What are some longer-term things that we should be pushing for? You mentioned education, you mentioned the school-to-prison pipeline, you mentioned public health and food deserts and all of these things that these community programs are looking toward. What are some things that we should be focused on in the longer term?
Education, 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 education.
Jacob?
I mean, education's good, but I'm not an academic. I didn't graduate college or anything like that, so I feel weird advocating for that. I see similar things like that in my community, where it's good to get educated, but like, where is that going to lead you? What are you going to do with that? So I mean, I think it's building those alternatives, like kind of like, you know, what we do even in a small way with like food and community and things like that. Like, it's the alternative methods that are gonna have a bigger effect in the community. Whether if it's us talking about domestic violence, with the, we farm food and we make art and this and that, but we're able to have these conversations too, and I think that leads to more effective change, like in those specific families and people that we're working with. So for me, it's like just creating those alternatives, because this system isn't really working for us.
Grace, I see you shaking your head.
Yeah, I think that, when we feel for the edges and the contours of what we all long for, right? It's a world where everybody thrives. Everybody without qualifiers. So regardless of race, regardless of whether or not you have a conviction history, that you can thrive and that your loved ones can thrive. So I think that requires different questions and different practices. So Dr. Cornel West says that justice is what love looks like in public, right?
That's excellent.
So what if that was our animating philosophy when we talk about the justice system, right? How do we create a system where we love one another, whether you have harmed someone or whether you've been harmed? And what if we order our communities that way too? I think that is a justice system. And the work of Flowers and Bullets and Tierra y Libertad, TYLO, the work that happens at House of Neighborly Services. I saw Dr. Andrea Romero in the room, the work that she does in South Tucson, the city of South Tucson. Those are people that are actually doing this work of building community and creating safety on the ground. So I think that, we're looking for environments where there's cooperation instead of competition. And I think that requires, a different imaginary.
I think that's it. We have to create a space where people can think of something other than what we've been doing, because it's not working for us. And we have to be honest enough to say that.
Yeah.
And there's so many people vested in maintaining this system. And we do push back. I mean, I don't know how we could have voted for giving cops equipment. We already have a militarized police department here. We voted to give them more money for equipment, but voted down a measure for kids to invest in children.
That's right.
That's this communities. There's something. So if we're talking about if justice is what love looks like, where is the love?
Well, I think
those are the questions that we need to ask.
Yeah, being more expansive in what we understand justice reinvestment being.
Yeah.
So what if we were siphoning money away from the police, from prisons, from detention centers, and putting it towards communities and community work, like Flowers and Bullets, like TYLO.
Tucson Second Chance Bill
Or
Fund.
Tucson Second Chance Bill
So
Fund.
I'm going to put that out there.
What if we were funding that? I think that's how we create safe communities.
Even without funding, though, because I don't want to make this about the money. It really is about how we feel about each other as neighbors and how we view each other as neighbors. Because at the end of the day, that's what it is people either helping people or working against people. And I think that's when I say how did we arrive at a place where we're voting down a measure that invests in kids, then that says something about our priorities as a community of people. Yeah. So I'm asking you, who is Tucson? Yeah. What kind of community do we want? So if we want a community where we are not criminalizing poverty, we are not dividing each other along boundaries of South, anything south of 22nd Street is Browntown, and that's where we police and we withdraw resources and put them in the foothills. If we don't want that to be who we are, then we have to change that. And part of this comes to me back to our leaders who we elect to hold these positions of power. And they are people who apparently don't have a lot of vision of what's possible, because they continue to do what they've always done, which is to say that we believe certain people have more value than other people. And the proof is that is the institutions that we've created, like the Tucson City Court, like the county attorney we have who has incarcerated so many people and continues to do that, mostly on drug offenses at a time when we all know that we have a drug epidemic going on. So we are criminalizing people we recognize as having a sickness, okay, and we're making money off of them. But we support those folks. We reelected her. So as much as we want to talk about these things, I want to say, where are you in the equation?
We're about to go to audience questions in a moment, right after Pastor Holt.
Yeah, I would like to say that I think that there's been an illusion in our criminal justice system. We think we give life sentences to people that have been convicted of murder, but I think if you're still paying for a sentence after you've paid your debt to society and you were released from incarceration, and because you still have a felony, you can't get a job, you can't get housing, you have a death sentence on you. We need to quit giving out death sentences for drug convictions, armed robbery, small little crimes, because even if you do 8 years in prison and then you re-enter society, when you're trying to get a job to rebound in your life and take care of your family, say what you want, that is devastating to an individual to where they can't take care of their own. So it's like you're paying a 2 or 3 time different type of sentence, even though you paid your debt to society. So we need to have a comprehensive expungement program in Arizona that can help individuals when they come out of prison, that they can clear their name in some kind of way where they can get a job and get a housing and start back in your life. If not, we're going to increase recidivism, and we're going to keep the cycle going back over and over and over again.
Let's go to our first question.
Good morning. My name is Isabel Garcia. I'm a criminal defense attorney. I was 22 and a half years the legal defender, and I'm with an immigrant rights organization. My question to you is, you heard the 2 police chiefs earlier, right? And they talked about acknowledging that crime is a result, really complex social injustice and that sort of thing. How do we get that to the line officers who went to city council to defeat something that helped all poor people? Public transportation. I was there. There was conversations about climate change, disability, people who need jobs, people who have a DUI conviction, have suspended license, on and on and on.
Yeah.
Transportation is a vital service. 2 weeks later, TPOA officials came in. That's the union of the police. It's not them, I understand. But how can leadership translate that message to their line attorneys who 2 weeks later went down and said, you know what, our cops need more money, all the typical stuff unions do, that's fine. But what did they end with? They said, why doesn't the public riders, the bus riders, take a hit as well? They need to take a hit as well. So I want to ask you guys, how does that bear on our Tucson Police Department union officers who went against the bus rider, help, and caused the city council to charge bus riders more than they were going to the week before?
I would just say that goes back to the question of leaders and the city council, because the city council didn't have to listen to them. The city council could have did something different. And if they chose to give them that type of authority and power over the people who depend on that system and who don't have who are going to be impacted by the increase in bus fares, then we have the wrong people in those positions. And I think that's it. The fact that we have so many law and order types sitting in mayor and city council is a problem, because that means they are always looking for ways to increase the budget for them and decrease the budget for us. We want a council, we want elected officials who put higher value on people than they do on bullets and guns. And that's not allowed to ask, but if we don't demand it, it's not going to happen.
One more question.
I'm Ashton Seepin from City High School. You were talking about how justice is love, but in a system where a great amount of our sexual assault cases are taken with a very light hand, how does justice and love play into that kind of serious crime?
I agree with you. I think there's a difference between accountability and punishment. So I think the fundamental question is, how do we hold people accountable in a way that is responsive also to people who have survived harm, right? I think when we have what we have, as my mentor and boss Caroline Isaac says, when we have this adversarial system, it prevents accountability from happening. So you as a defendant, you're trying to get the least, possible sentence, right? How does that make you, or how can you hold yourself accountable to perhaps the harm that you committed if what you're trying to do is get out of this structure, right? So I don't think that the system works for people who have survived harm or people who commit harm. It's different questions, I think, that we need to be asking of the system.
And I think that what Grace was saying is absolutely right. You have to say, so what is the goal here? Is the goal to punish? Is the goal to heal? Is there a way to reconcile these two things? And these are the types of questions in our communities that we have not tackled, because we have been part of a criminal justice system that divides folks along, good and bad. Mm-hmm. Okay, and the truth of the matter is, there are things that are much more complicated than that. Mm-hmm. And families, there's sexual abuse going on in families, and so these relationships continue. What do we do about addressing the damage done and still allow families to come to heal, allowing people to be held accountable without destroying communities? And I think that's something that we're just now starting to recognize that we have not been doing at all, because if we lock people up, they're coming back out into the same communities they left, and they're going to maybe be around the victims again. What are we doing to really address the complex relationships that we have with people in our communities, some of whom are doing some pretty terrible things? A lot of it because some of them are sick, and some of them are just doggone bad people too. I guess I said bad people, but there's some people who are really angry and hurtful and destructive people. So what do we do for communities that have folks like that living among them? Do we keep locking them up? We're building prisons, and it's not solving the problem.
Yeah, I think that also, when you talk about love, another word that goes with love is respect. You can't say you love something or love someone and you don't have a level of respect. So going back to the sexual harassment that we're seeing that's beginning to be this big epidemic we're seeing nationally and locally, it's still a divide when it comes to justice, the superior over inferior. So you have men that's doing these type of assaults, misconduct, and nothing's been done to them. And even though it's not in the court of justice, it's still a court of public opinion of how it looks. It still looks like famous people that have a name for themselves, that have a brand, can get away with mistreating young ladies and women in the workforce. And I'm proud of the women stepping up and crying out and saying, I'm not going to take this anymore. And that's what we need. But now we have to take it to the next level and say, is there some criminality piece to that? And why aren't they also being brought to justice as well?
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank...
I just wanted to add that there is like some great efforts out there in terms of like some of the work that Emerge is doing and some of the community groups that are doing work around like challenging male supremacy. Those type of circles like are crucial, and I think those are like the counter spaces for what you're talking about with the punishment and how does that work. Yeah, so I support those spaces, and I think that those conversations need to happen more amongst us men.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to thank our 4 panelists. I think we've seen today that dealing with the complex roots of the criminal justice system extends beyond policing, and the work that the 4 of you are doing exemplifies that. So I want to thank you for coming, and thank you all for listening.